Oh, cool. So here we are. I don't have any gizmos. I don't have any colors. I don't have any music yet. This is my first show. Um, I barely even have a name, but for now it's Talking Tennis. And I'm really pleased to have on Owen Lewis of Popcorn Tennis, who has come across my path on social media a few times over the last couple of years in particular, and none more so than an article which we will be touching on very soon that he published in the middle of January, which in some ways became dated 2 weeks later, but in other ways perhaps gained purpose. But we'll come to that in a minute. Owen, thanks for having you on, and how's it going?
Thanks for having me. It's going well. I was telling you before this, I literally just rolled out of bed, and so I'm very late to this, which I apologize for. But yeah, glad to be here and excited to talk some tennis.
Cool. And of course, it was really good to meet you in person in May, June time. I actually think it was probably beginning of June by the time we actually met in Paris. So that was really cool. And of course, we'll be touching on that. This entire show is going to be Owen and I chewing the fat, as we would say in the UK, a bit of Cockney rhyming slang for you there, Owen, just having a chat about the ATP year. We will be touching on other players, of course. But given Federer's continued absence, really, it's two players that are constantly in the headlines on the men's side. But there are other people that will get touched upon throughout. But we're going to look at the ATP tour as a whole. But unsurprisingly, we're going to be concentrating on Messrs. Nadal and Djokovic. And Owen, quite a start to the year we had. I mean, can you remember those first 3 or 4 days of the year, or even end of December? And we had Nadal with the COVID scenario,
Yeah,
and we also had a certain question mark about Djokovic. Can you remember those times?
yeah, I can. I mean, before the question mark going into the Australian Open, it really the feeling was okay. Djokovic is going to win 21 because he had won three majors in 2021, made the final of the fourth one, and then he's going into the Australian Open, which he had won 9 times. And you had Nadal, who not only had COVID, but hadn't won the Australian Open since 2009 and had never beaten Djokovic there. So,
Hmm.
as far as that matchup went, looked pretty good for Djokovic. And then things changed pretty quickly, and unfortunately, I would say.
Yeah. Did you? I went on record in mid-December to say I think he's going to get vaccinated. He'd had the situation with his elbow injury where he probably tried his best to avoid surgery, but ultimately that was the only route for him to get back to playing and playing soon. And I thought he would take a similar path with the vaccine, but how wrong I was. What were your thoughts on that, Owen?
I didn't think he was vaccinated. I remember seeing on Twitter everyone thought he was, but I felt like he had more of a reason to hide his status if he wasn't vaccinated. And with the history of kind of dubious pseudo scientific claims he's had sometimes, I think I feared enough that I was like, I don't want to buy into the idea that he is vaccinated. I wanted to, but I didn't really trust it.
Yeah, I just thought that he would leave it until the last moment, if you
Mhm.
like, so mid-December, i.e., and then he would go, okay, I got no other way around this. And but how wrong I was because he wasn't vaccinated, and we found out all the answers to many of the questions. Although, as it turned out, the questions would increase three or fourfold in the coming days. But that we'll come to that in a second. And we realized that he wasn't vaccinated at the point when we saw the infamous, now I guess, tweet. Um, I'm gonna share that tweet with you now, and yeah,
This
what
should
did
come with a
you?
content warning label.
Oh, really? Yeah, yeah, it should do. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it should do. But what were your thoughts at the point when he, when he sent that tweet out?
I was disappointed that he wasn't vaccinated. Um, so I think that was my primary emotion. I mean, and then after that, I was kind of thinking, like, Novak, what are you doing? Like, you don't want to announce that you've got an exemption permission on social media. But he did. Um, so yeah, I think like as a tennis fan, I was like, good, we get to see him play because he's the king of the Australian Open.
Hmm.
Fantastic player, great to watch. But I really didn't like that he wasn't vaccinated. So yeah, I think that's about where I was.
Yeah, I have to share the right screen, but I'll come to that in a second. Yeah, and then we had the whole thing with him in the air. If you remember, the next 12 to 24 hours, it seemed like he was on his way. It seemed like he would be playing, but then the Australian Prime Minister came out and said, try and remember his exact words there. I don't care who you are. You can be Novak Djokovic. You can be anyone. If you don't have the right permission, you're not coming in. That Australian Prime Minister, by the way, had an election to think about and a certain probably part of the country to pander to. As it turned out, he ended up losing that election. But perhaps I don't know really quite what an influence the Novak Djokovic episode had on that. But yeah, and then we have the situation with him arriving in Australia, and there's pictures of him at the airport and images, and there's memes and there's jokes of him stuck at the airport, the terminal stuff. I mean, it was quite unbecoming or just quite uncomfortable viewing at times. I found seeing him sort of, being, I don't know what the word is, but just, being like the rest of us, I guess. And then having to go to that hotel, and I had some sympathy for him. We had various different players coming out in press conferences. I don't know why, but again, I had this hunch that he would probably be okay. But once again, I should stop making Djokovic and vaccine predictions because it didn't turn out that way. What are your memories of that sort of week-long period of him? Will he, won't he be allowed to enter Australia?
It was awful because it completely dominated tennis news. And yeah, there were just outrageous scenes throughout the whole thing. I think something
Mm-hmm.
people forget is even after he won that initial court thing, like he was practicing on Rod Laver Arena for a bit with
Yeah,
like a drone above him, like filming
yeah,
him. Like that's outrageous. How did something like that happen? And yeah, I did feel for him a little bit just because I think they put him in like a room and took away his phone for a few hours, and he was there for a really long time, and then in the end only got sent back. And so like I consistently through this I wished he had gotten vaccinated, and I still wish that.
yeah.
But
I
I
mean,
don't I
the
don't
way
feel great about how he was treated.
No, I think to be honest with you, I don't think anybody really came out of it with flying colours, whether that be the Melbourne government or Victoria government, as I should probably say, in terms of their mixed messages. The Australian government, I don't think, in their political point scoring. And if we just looked at that, and we won't go down the road of politics too much, but I'll leave that to Tennis Sanguine and one or two political commentators in the US who have their own podcast. But if we think about how he was eventually got rid of from the country, it was kind of an authoritarian decision to just overrule the judges and overrule democracy, arguably, and just one individual or one party saying, no, we don't want him here, even though really he'd managed to get in. And don't forget, there was a doubles player, I don't know if you remember her name, Owen, because I don't, who had been in the country for a few days at least and even played a match before, also getting ejected as a result of the Djokovic trial, if you like.
Yeah, and I don't remember her name either. I think that sort of spoke to the political side of this. Like, she was not a big enough name to really try to score political points over by deporting her. Like, and I think that was an argument people made who were pro Djokovic staying. Like,
Yeah,
there are other people here. It's just that, like, no one, like, in the same situation, it's just that no one is really concerned about them because they're not Novak Djokovic. And
right.
yeah, I mean the political side of this like was not good. I think like a politician trying to score points with the masses by deporting someone, like it's icky,
Yeah.
for sure. But yeah,
I th-
again, he should have gotten vaccinated in the first place.
yeah. And I think Craig Tiley, Tennis Australia. I mean, there's reports of him turning up at Melbourne Airport with Tennis Australia letterheaded stuff, and the because we also had this kind of weird scenario that certainly coming from the UK, we kind of have much more of a centralized way of governing in terms of London just basically decides everything, rightly or wrongly. And again, that's a debate for another day. But we have this situation where if London says one thing, then that's it. In Australia, of course, you have two governments, a local or regional government, the state of Victoria, which are kind of saying one thing, and then the national government are saying another. So it's almost like you can get into Victoria, but you couldn't get into Australia, or the other way around at times. And the messaging was ambiguous. But in my time of traveling around just Europe, actually during the pandemic, I found lots of mixed messaging, and I think sometimes it was so mixed and so ambiguous that actually I think that then put governments in a situation where they could just make a decision like this if they wanted. I think it has to be intentional when you've got nobodies like me that are picking holes in some of the the wording on some of these websites. And by the way, in terms of the letterheaded stuff from Tennis Australia, I was kind of gutted that I didn't chance my arm of trying to go, because I was actually kind of interested in going to Australia, and I thought, okay, yeah, I'm vaccinated, blah 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 blah. And it was only just a few days before the tournament began, as I was looking into it very seriously, I could easily have booked a flight. And it was like, oh, actually, vaccinated people or otherwise, unless you're going there for work purposes or have a family member there, you aren't coming in either. And it was such a shame that they actually lifted that mandate midway through February.
Yeah.
But whatever they lifted or didn't lift, they didn't lift it in time for Djokovic to play. He was eventually booted out. It was a rather unfortunate and I think nobody, but Djokovic doesn't cover himself in any glory here either. The whole timeline with he was told that he needed to be vaccinated to come to Australia or to come play the Australian Open. He had to submit basically his application to play in that tournament by a certain date in December, I think beginning of December. So that's passed, and then suddenly he gets COVID in the middle of December, and is meeting people in public without a mask, etc., including a journalist. But we are here to talk about tennis, and so we will move on from the Djokovic scenario. I just wanted to touch on it because I think it's impossible not to. And to be honest with you, it's still with us 8 months later, and it may still be with us in another 12 months from now, depending on what happens over the coming 12 months. And I'm sure we'll get chances to touch upon it again. But there's plenty of tennis to talk about. And I'd like to bring us now towards this article that I highlighted at the beginning of the show that I read of yours, Owen, back in January, middle of January, just on the eve of the tournament, which was called The Fighter. And I'd like you to tell us a little bit about, where did this idea come from? Is it something that was burning on your brain that you thought for years about writing, and then finally you got the chance to do it? And by the way, if that was the case, you got in just in the nick of time. Anyway, tell us a bit about this article.
Yeah. So before the tournament, I think I wanted to write something long. And I'd been thinking about Nadal at the Australian Open because for me, sort of his defining quality is like the way he fights and like changes tactics, and how that can turn a match from like a straight set thrashing into maybe an epic 5-setter.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking, I think he's probably done that more at the Australian Open than any other tournament. He's played so many epic classic matches there. The semi and the final in 2009, the final in 2012, the semi and the final in 2017, and then the final this year now, although that hadn't happened at the time. But I was thinking
also,
what was...
You could also throw Dominic Thiem in there. I mean, I know it was only 4 sets, but it was tight. Oh, sorry. No,
Great match. Yeah, absolutely. But the interesting thing for me was that he's lost a lot of those matches. Like he's lost that team match. He lost that 5-hour, 53-minute final to Djokovic. Like that one is like a quintessential Nadal match, like way behind, fought tooth and nail, completely transformed the match, and he still lost. Yeah. And that was fascinating to me. And so I wanted to write about how like he's like all his strongest qualities are like out in force at the Australian Open, but it hasn't really resulted in any wins, at least not since 2009. And I said like at Roland Garros, he crushes everyone, but he never really has to work there, at least not to the same extent. And that almost makes it less exciting to watch him there. So yeah, I wrote this piece, and I basically concluded for Nadal at the Australian Open, what matters most is that he gets to play these kind of matches, not whether he wins or loses them. And that ended up being a really ironic conclusion because he went on to win the tournament, which I think I even said at one point in the piece, like, he's not going to win this year because, like, Djokovic may still get in. I think this was before he got deported. Medvedev is there, who will beat Nadal. Other players are there. And also Nadal's not built properly enough to the tournament with COVID and the injuries the previous year. So he's not going to be at his best. And then, yeah, all of that got proven wrong very quickly. But it was a fun piece to write because he is so much history with the Australian Open, and that was fun to go into.
Yeah. You obviously got the injuries as well. You touched upon 2018. I think I sometimes think with Nadal that he sort of has a very good feeling and he knows when. I'll give you I think in 2018, I think he thought he had an excellent chance of winning that tournament. I actually think
Yeah.
in 2017, he got to the final. He had the epic match with Zverev on the way. That was his kind of comeback tournament. But I don't think he hit, despite the fact he got to his first, slam final in 2 or 3 years, I still think there was a lot more, he's still a long way from his best in that tournament, in my opinion. And I think 2018, a year later, having just won the US Open a few months before, I think he was playing better than Federer in that tournament. So I think him losing to Cilic there. 2014, funny enough, that final with Wawrinka is the match I think I've heard him say that one probably hurt or bothered him or irked him the most. I've heard him talk very recently, of course, when he pulled out at Wimbledon, saying, and he was asked about losing or pulling out injured, which hurts more, and he said pulling out injured, bothers him far more. And he's even talked about some of those Australian Open losses, and he can set aside even the nail biters to Djokovic in 2012 or Team or even Tsitsipas in 2021.
Mm-hmm.
But he says, I remember him saying Wawrinka. I forget what his win-loss record was at the time, but he was certainly on a good winning streak against Wawrinka, and he highlighted that.
He had won all 26 sets they'd ever played, 13-0.
So
So he likes
exactly.
his chances, put it that way.
Yeah, and he's okay saying it retrospectively after the injury, and it's several years later. In fact, it was probably about a year ago he said this. That's the one I think that just annoys him the most, because I think he just thought, I'm going to win this. I also saw a similar, very different tournament, even very different level of tournament, albeit a Masters 1000. I don't know if I've ever seen him look as devastated as I did this year in Indian Wells. When I think part of that was just because, as we saw at Wimbledon as well, I think he thinks that he's a much better player than Taylor Fritz. And I think that's what bothered him quite a lot this year. We'll come to Indian Wells in a second, though, because I think we've still got a bit more to talk about regarding Australia. I think the Melbourne summer set was quite important. I didn't realize that it was going to mean he would win the Australian Open, but I did think that meant, okay, I was fearing that he could easily go out first or second round. He could still have a good 2022 and maybe win the French and maybe win another slam. But I thought that this slam, obviously coming after 6 months of barely any action, and I thought that it might come too soon. And I thought I was actually paying quite close attention. I think I watched every match of his at that summer set. And what that did for me was, it was like, I think now he's not going to go out early. I think that put aside any fears he was going to go out in week one. Nadal, by the way, himself has pinpointed the victory against Khachanov in the third round, I think it was actually. And he said that was a mini turning point for him and his belief regarding this tournament.
Yeah, I think that's a great one. I agree that the summer set was a useful building block there. I think for me, it was almost less because of the match practice and more because he got to play on Rod Laver Arena before the tournament started. I think that's invaluable. Getting used to those conditions under way less pressure.
True.
Before the tournament even gets going. And yeah, that Khachanov match was interesting because he was up 2 sets and then he lost the third. And I remember seeing Nadal fans on Twitter were worried. But then I think second game of the fourth set, he hit some crazy shots. There was one where he went way into his backhand corner to hit an inside-out forehand, and that was a winner. He hit a passing shot on the run, and then he ended up winning that set really comfortably. And after that, people said, okay, he's a contender to win this whole thing because that level was really high.
Yeah. I don't think I'm giving away too many. I don't think there's anybody watching right now. I think we've only got 4 or 5 people who doesn't know how the tournament ended. So I'll quite comfortable with splitting to that screen. But I then started to think. That yes, he could go far. He could now get to the semis. We had that Shapovalov match. I mean, that was kind of nuts as well. We had the nuts tiebreaker against Manarino as well, that I think was 16-14, albeit then the match sort of went in a fairly rudimentary manner. And then the semi-final against Berrettini was 4 sets. But actually, during that third set, I thought, hang on a second, is this slipping away a bit like Tsitsipas had done a year before? Because Berrettini barely dropped a point for about a set and a half. And Nadal seized a moment, as he often does, at the end or towards the end of the fourth. And that was that. But, if he hadn't seized the moment there, I started to fear from a bit. But I guess, we're already 20 minutes in, so I think we should really at least dwell a few minutes on that final.
Yeah.
I went into the final thinking Medvedev is going to win.
Mm-hmm.
I think Medvedev had looked great for about 6 or 7 months. He'd been in the final a year before, and only Djokovic beat him, and that can happen. But he also beat Djokovic in straight sets. I'm trying to remember how he did at the end of year tour finals. I think he got to the semifinals or the final.
Got to the final and then kind of played a flat match.
Okay. Yeah, that's right. He lost to Zverev. That's right. And but he'd been in really good form for 6 months. Yeah. And by the way, regarding Medvedev, because I think we should just touch upon him, he's not won a tournament this year.
Yeah, that's right. He's been to the final of a couple.
Yeah.
I think. But yeah, and it's weird because he spent a lot of the year as world number one, which is deserved, by the way. But yeah, it's a little bit of a strange dynamic. I remember a weird match was because he played Nadal in the Acapulco semifinals as the world number one, and Nadal beat him like 6-3, 6-3, and I was like, is Nadal the best player in the world? So like it did feel like that at the time. Yeah, I mean, rankings are week to week, but sometimes a gap between points will be big enough that sometimes it takes some time for the rankings to catch up to players' form.
Yeah, but I do think this year has been particularly weird. And I know we've had, the pandemic, and they did the 2-year thing and blah, 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 and various other things go on. But to have the 3 slam winners from this year who've also done well elsewhere, we had it's only a 250, but at Melbourne 250, we also had the 500 at Acapulco. We also had Djokovic winning in Rome.
Yep.
And yet these 2 guys are ranked 3 and 7 in the world. One guy is 19-0 in majors, and he's still world number 3. I think he's barely gone up in the rankings all year. Albeit we probably will see him soar now. And but aside from the rankings, Medvedev, he does seem to be a person who goes in streaks. Mm-hmm. But the streaks are also pretty negative. And I would say he had a hangover and maybe still has got a hangover. And I know many people understandably are tipping him to do well at the US Open and maybe even win it. But his form has fallen off a cliff since then. I know he got to the final at a grass court tournament. I think it was a 250. Although did he get to Halle final as well, 500?
Something like that.
Yeah, but he didn't. He actually had a very easy run to that Halle final, and obviously the 250 final as well when he lost to the Dutchman Van Rijthoven. But his form has gone off the cliff. And I remember Acapulco actually quite clearly. We're going to come back to Australia in a second, but I actually think Nadal played better in Acapulco than he did in Australia. I thought he was unbelievable against Cam Noe in the final, against Medvedev as well. And I forget who he played. I think it was before Medvedev, and I think he won like 6-2, 6-2 or something. And I forget who it was. It was a top 30 player anyway. And he was just unbelievable. And maybe it was his best performance of the year in a match way down the list of importance, so will easily get forgotten. But I just couldn't believe what I was seeing at times in that match. Australia, though, final. Yeah. Going into it, you thought the same as me. Medvedev is going to win this.
Yeah, and I really didn't give Nadal much of a chance at all.
Me neither.
I mean, he had been openly admitting that he was getting tired in his earlier matches, none of which, even the Shapovalov one, which went to 5 sets, had been that grueling. And so I was thinking, he's got to win this in 3 or 4, but that's not going to happen because Medvedev is a better hardcourt player right now. He's more in form, and he's going to have more in the legs. And the way he plays, like huge wingspan, way behind the baseline, fantastic movement, good depth on the run. You can't hit through him. Like, you can't play quick points against Medvedev. His game is expressly like equipped to destroy serve +1 plays or like get back winners, lengthen points. So I thought it was a horrible situation for Nadal. I mean, early in the second set, this was a point Nadal won. They played a 40-shot rally, and that set up, I think, Nadal's first break points of the match. But even then, it's like, is this the way he wants things to go? Like, you don't want to be playing a 40-shot rally. Your opponent is 10 years younger than you. And I think pretty much everyone was on the same page endurance wise. Like Nadal needs to win this quickly if he's going to win at all. And everyone was wrong because he went for 5 hours and 24 minutes and was fitter apparently. So
Yeah.
sometimes tennis is weird.
What was the biggest factor? It's very difficult to pinpoint one moment or one factor. I think that 40 shot rally is interesting because it was an amazing winner from him as well, which I actually
Yeah.
watched another match recently, just some old highlights of his, and he did a very similar shot, but I can't even remember what the match was. But I was like, wow, that's just like the shot he did at the end of the 40 shot rally. And I think it was against Federer in maybe AO9, but anyway, whatever. And I was like, that's the same backhand sort of weird, almost physics defying shot that he did against Medvedev. But anyway, what would you say is the biggest factor in either Nadal's win or Medvedev's loss, whichever way you want to look at it?
I mean, there was a patch in the third set that ended up being a huge swing. Not just the game where Nadal held from love 40, which we have to mention.
Yeah,
Medvedev had 3 break points at 3-2 up in the third set. So
yeah.
if he breaks there,
He had,
2
I
sets
think he
up,
had four. He got
4-2.
another. He had another one in that game actually that gets
Did he?
forgotten. Yeah, he went at an
Okay.
advantage. Which, funny enough, it's one of those ones. That, oh my god, he got a fourth one in that one. Yeah,
Yeah, and then you really should break. Yeah, I hadn't remembered that. But yeah, I think Nadal saved one with a drop shot winner, maybe forced an error on another one, and then the others were Medvedev errors. And I think people look at that as like this swing. But something I think gets forgotten is that Nadal finished that set playing really well. In the 4-all game with Medvedev serving, he breaks with a backhand passing shot down the line from way behind the baseline. And then when he's serving for the set at 5-4, he hits 4 winners in a row to hold it love. And so I think that not only gave him a set and some momentum and some crowd support, it gave him some confidence going into the fourth set. And I think he ended up having to save break points early in that set. But I think the way he won that third set made me think he might have a little bit left as well. I still thought Medvedev would win in 4, but I thought, okay, like Nadal still has something to say in this match. And then when he got a break in the fourth, Medvedev started to look tired. He was hitting these bad drop shots. That's when the match started to seem up in the air for me.
yeah, and at times as well, Medvedev's mind seemed a bit frazzled, maybe from the physical exertions, but maybe some of the mental side of it too. Sometimes he was caught in no man's land in the middle of the court, didn't really know whether to stay at the net or go back to the baseline. Yeah, all sorts of twists and turns in that match, but you're right, that pivotal moment in the middle of the third set was huge. I do think as well around the same time, towards the end of the third set, I think when Nadal did sort of was on the verge of breaking, there was a moment when Nadal looked at Carlos Moya and it was still on serve, and I think he just lost out on a break point. He did a sort of
Yeah,
tried to do a bizarre backhand thing that
I
was a bit
remember this.
was in desperation actually more than anything else. And he looked at Carlos Moya and sort of one of the only times I can remember in Nadal's career where he sort of just looks like, I don't know what else to do here. And I've sort of done everything I can. I mean, maybe even throwing the kitchen sink isn't an exaggeration to say that he didn't have many options left. It seemed like.
Yeah,
But then he had another break point in that game and he took it and didn't look back in many ways.
yeah, that moment was kind of ironic because on the first break point, I think he looked like that because he had a forehand volley like right on top of the net and kind of tried to punch it past Medvedev, but Medvedev was so quick that he got there anyway and then hit it past Nadal, and then Nadal missed that flick while running backwards. And I think he looked at Moya like that because he was like, I had it. Like I was
Yeah,
about to break there and it didn't happen.
got it.
But then like you said,
Mhm.
he had another break point right after, so it didn't
Yeah,
really end up mattering. Um,
no. I mean, just
and
one more thing. I know, and we've got to get on because there's still half the season to go, or several months of the season to go. But there
yeah,
was also the end of the second set. Don't forget, I think he broke twice in
yeah,
that second set, and he got broke
yeah,
back twice. And he had a smash volley, which, if we think about some of the misses he did against Tsitsipas in 2021, well, this was even worse. He was right on top of the
yeah,
net. I think it was a serve and volley, maybe. I'm not sure if it was a servant or serve and then he let it bounce because it just flies up in the end. He lets it, but whatever. I just remember him being basically on top of the net, and I've barely seen this point since. Just because there's so many really important points in the match that maybe this one is no longer important. And somehow he dumps it into the net. And before he knows it, he's love 40 down in that game, gets it back to deuce. And I think he gets a couple of set points. This is when he's trying to serve for the set, and then he
yeah.
loses that, and then he loses the tie break. And you're just thinking, well, there's just no way that he can win the match from here. But we've said that before on many occasions. And of course, He gets it back to 2-2, and then going into the fifth set, did you make Nadal favorite at that point, or were you still thinking the younger man should be favorite?
It's funny. At first, I still kind of thought Medvedev would win because it was shaping up like another one of those Nadal at the Australian Open matches, right? Where like he's behind, he makes a huge push, and it's not quite enough, and his opponent has a little bit left. Maybe they hit a great winner on a big point, or Nadal goes a little bit off on a big point, and then it sneaks away from him. But then in like the first game, Medvedev is like approaching to Nadal's forehand and getting passed down the line. And I was like, okay, this. And pretty quickly, it was clear that Medvedev's legs were gone. I think at 2-all, he hit a backhand, like a rally backhand. And it was terrible. It sat up right in the middle of the court, got demolished for a winner. And I realized, like, he's gassed. He has nothing left.
Right.
But then when he broke back for 5-all, after Nadal had 5-4, 30 love, it looked up in the air again. But yeah, I think in retrospect, Medvedev didn't play a great fifth set. I think if Nadal had been slightly more clinical, he could have won it 6-2 or something.
Maybe. And I mean, of course, he served it out. And listen, I'm going to front up now. Anyone who follows my Twitter feed or has seen me on Game to Love or anywhere, they'll know where my allegiances lie. So when he serves, when he's serving for the match at 5-4, was it, I think?
Yep.
And, yeah, 5-4. And it's 30 love, and then it goes to 30 all. I think that includes a double fault as well. And eventually he's on now facing break point, and he dumps a backhand into the net, which you would imagine he should normally be able to do in his sleep. He admits in his post-match interview, just like fans of his were thinking, he uses the F word and says 2012, 2017. And of course, we're all thinking that. You never know with Rafa, I think, what he's thinking, because he's always quite guarded, both in his on-court and off-court interviews. We spoke about this ourselves at the French Open or a little bit afterwards, I think, on our spaces on Twitter. You never quite know what he's thinking. And it was kind of interesting to think, he was thinking the same as us at that point, in that, oh, goodness, because, of course, he was a breakup in both those matches. But I highlighted it on a Game to Love podcast earlier this year. The break point that he then gets again in the next match, so it's 5-all, 6-5. I won't go into sort of all the details. I'm going to basically assume quite a lot of knowledge from our viewers and etc. The one when he actually breaks, it comes from a Medvedev mistake, so that helps. But it's still a really, really top first serve from Medvedev.
Yeah, it's an ace a lot of the time.
Exactly, down the tee. And I highlighted this on Game to Love at the beginning of the year. In 2012, when Djokovic has got match point. And
it's the same serve, you're right.
Same with Federer in 2017. Exactly the same. Down the tee, same city, same tournament, 5 years each time apart. Both at crucial points. The only difference was that neither Medvedev nor Nadal had match point at this point, but you could argue it was equivalent to. And the serves are identical. And Nadal gets his racket on all three of those serves. Excuse me. The difference is the return against Djokovic in 2012, which you'll remember very well and be very well aware of, doesn't really fall that deep. And it's really there for Djokovic to put away. And Djokovic, being Djokovic, does. Federer quite similarly, although he nearly blew it. In fact, Nadal goes for the challenge, doesn't it? But Nadal sort of does this afterwards.
Right.
And Federer's kind of like the same, but I think it's sort of, we're all thinking it's probably 70-30 likely it did land in. And it did. The difference on this occasion, though, is his return goes really deep, or quite deep enough to make Medvedev make a mistake. And I remember one of the co-commentators, funny enough, I watched it in Hungary with Hungarian commentators, but I've seen it a million times since, or certainly the highlights with some of the English commentary. And I think it's one of the Australian commentators goes, "What a return, Petch." He's talking to Mark Petchy.
Yeah.
What a return. And I don't know if he's getting carried away in the moment, but I also remember some other classic commentary from the same commentators where they're talking about putting the lid on the coffin in terms of Nadal's Australian Open chances midway through that third set with the 3 break points. There's another commentary bit where I think Petchy says he will never hit a better shot than that when Nadal breaks. Some really good commentary.
Right. Yeah, he said that's the best shot
he's ever hit. And to be honest with you, I felt like at the time, I mean, you're quite right. Probably in the moment we were getting carried away, but I do think moments are important. as a soccer or football fan myself, I put Maradona's goal at 86 up there as the number one. There could be a better goal scored, on Wimbledon Common tomorrow, or in a park in New York, or on the beach in Brazil next week. But it's not a World Cup quarterfinal, so
Right.
I do think moments do matter, and I can understand why Mark Petchey, I think it was, got carried away in the moment. Anyway, but that return of serve lands deep. Medvedev hits it long. This time, Nadal doesn't make any mistakes in seeing out the match. And I remember listening to the tennis podcast and David Law saying shortly after, the next day, I think, after the final, excuse me, saying he knew Nadal would see it out. He's got a theory, which I'm sure has some holes in it, but he has a theory that once you have one chance and don't take it, but you get another chance, you almost always do. And he said he had no doubt that Nadal would see it out, and he did, to love.
Yeah.
So there we go. We've got this comment at the bottom of the screen there about Shapovalov not being the same since. I would agree. A bit like Medvedev. Where's Shapovalov gone? I was thinking once the grass court season arrives, he'll be fine. Wasn't the case. What's happened to Shapo this year?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think not the same understates it. He lost, 6, 7 matches in a row. I mean, that's, as a top 20 player, that's horrendous, to put it lightly. I don't know what's happened to him, because that losing streak started out of nowhere. He beats Nadal in Rome. Nadal hampered by the foot, but, played a great second set. And then he kind of loses a tight straight setter to Casper Ruud. No shame in that. Casper Ruud's great on clay, great everywhere. So, you're thinking that's progress, right? He had a good Rome tournament, and then he goes and loses in the first round at Roland Garros, 3-6, 1-6, 6-7 to Holger Rune, and continues losing in first rounders. It's completely inexplicable to me.
And he didn't make any impression on grass really at all.
No.
I thought maybe he would wake up at Wimbledon. I just, again, another one of my masterful predictions. I just thought, what? I think he's going to wake up here and he'll have a good run at Wimbledon. Didn't happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the semi last year could give you some hope, and I think it's a combination of how volatile his game is and how volatile his mind is. I mean, that Nadal match at the Australian Open, he was close to going up a break in the fifth set, but he did not play a good match. If you watch those first 2 sets, he has no idea what he's doing tactically. He's hitting to Nadal's forehand without pace. And there's a game in the second set where I think he gets to deuce on Nadal's serve, and he plays some ridiculous defense. But if you watch the points, he's giving Nadal exactly the kind of ball he wants. So Nadal is hitting these crazy forehands, and Shapovalov is making these long sprints to get them back. And even if you win a couple of those points, this is not how you want to play a match against Rafa. And that was essentially what he did the entire time. And he played a bit better in the third and the fourth sets, and Nadal had his dip. And then I think in the fifth set, Shapovalov made 13 unforced errors. So you can say he should have done better, but I think on any other day, he doesn't even get to a fifth set playing like that.
And Nadal just managed to sort of basically do the opposite of what he did against Taylor Fritz in that fifth set, of just, he's got a good serve and he sort of just he gets a break at the beginning and he just sort of keeps his serve really on it. And I said the opposite of the Taylor Fritz match at Wimbledon, because he didn't have a serve for that fifth set really. And he just had to rely on the rest of his game to win the match, which is, again, we all know that Nadal often finds a way. Anyway, we've done Australia. We touched a bit on Acapulco. Nadal cleans up there. We then come to the summer swing in Florida, or the Sunshine Double with Florida, Miami, sorry. And before that, Indian Wells. We had the final, Taylor Fritz winning that final. I think it was really nice for him. Of course, he went into that final with an injury too, we mustn't forget.
Yeah.
By the way, we've also got Alcaraz, and we're going to have 15 years of talking about Alcaraz. I'm not going to touch on him too much today. We all know how amazing he is. And funny enough, when you were mentioning Shapovalov there, both with aggressive game styles, but just one maybe much better than the other, but certainly one much more consistent than the other. And that's why I think the trajectories of their careers will be very different. But Indian Wells, we just mentioned Taylor Fritz winning there. Of course, no Djokovic still. Djokovic, meanwhile, does play a tournament in Dubai, goes out pretty early. We then get to Miami, which is obviously won by the aforementioned Spaniard, Alcaraz. And then we get to the clay court season, and we're still seeing travails from Djokovic. What were you thinking about Djokovic's trajectory at this point in terms of French Open possibilities, bearing in mind how Dubai and also Monte Carlo and also even Serbia had gone with him getting to the final there?
Yeah, so he was definitely building. Like, make no mistake about that. He was playing better in each successive tournament. But I think, like, with the vaccination thing, I was less optimistic than a lot of people. Like, when he played Fokina in Monte Carlo in his first match, and he got breadsticked in the third set. I was like, I haven't seen his endurance falter like this. Like, it makes sense. He hasn't been playing. He has no match practice. And then it happened again against Rublev in Serbia. I was like, okay, this is still worrying. Like, he'll probably get it back because that's what he does. But, and then he won Rome and he was dominant in doing that. But in retrospect, it was misleading because he wasn't pushed hard enough to really, I think, get that back, like that endurance and that willingness to grind, I guess. And he had that against Alcaraz in Madrid. It was a fantastic match that he came very close to winning, stealing, really. Hit an ace down match point at 4-5 in the third. Like, probably, I think any other player would have lost that third set very comfortably because he was under pressure the entire time.
Two of my favorite matches to watch this year. I mean, I saw you tweet a few weeks ago about, best match of this year on the men's side, I think at least. And to be honest with you, I don't think I mentioned either of these two matches, but perhaps I should have done, because the two Alcaraz matches against Nadal and Djokovic, the focus of this podcast, are just unbelievable. I was the one at Indian Wells. I was rolling around my sofa aghast for points from both sides of the net. Just couldn't believe what I was seeing at times. I think it might have been Mary Corello, or it might have been Billie Jean King, said that was the best match of the year by far for her. Then regarding that Madrid match, equally knife edge stuff, equally top class stuff, with at times I think both players playing better. And of course, Djokovic winning the first set, I believe. And it was the end of the second set when I wouldn't call it a turning point because you still weren't sure quite how the match was going to go. But the way he won that second set, Alcaraz, was just breathtaking.
It was outrageous. And I need to take a second to talk about Alcaraz's speed.
Yeah, sure.
This
as long
guy
as you want.
It's
your
fast.
time, Owen. It's your time.
I appreciate it. He is so fast, not only laterally from the baseline, but he's the first guy I've seen in ages who he'll just take the drop shot completely out of your arsenal because he gets to everything.
Oh, yeah.
Like, when someone comes to net, I will think against Alcaraz, I will think, like, don't hit a drop volley because you're screwed if you do that. During the Madrid match against Djokovic, he loves a drop shot, especially on clay. And he just stopped hitting them, essentially. I think he lost something like 15 of the 20 where he tried a drop shot, or where either player tried a drop shot. And I said on Twitter, like, when was the last time someone neutralized Djokovic's drop shot like this? Not just in getting it back, but in making him stop hit it entirely.
Yeah.
And a lot of people said, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Nadal 2020 Roland Garros final, I guess.
Yeah, well, that was what people were saying, but that match was not the same because Nadal was getting to some, but and he was doing well with some, but like a lot of them were still clean winners from Djokovic.
Okay.
And in this match, it was like Alcaraz just completely took away that option from him. It's not like he was even getting to them consistently. It was that, like, he got to them so often and so well that it just wasn't worth it for Djokovic to hit them anymore. And I can barely remember a match that Djokovic has played where he just stops hitting drop shots. And Alcaraz completely killed that option for him. It was amazing. Yeah, just watching him defend is outrageous. I mean, do you remember those points he played against Ramos Vinolas at Roland Garros in the fifth set? I think they're both on break point. One of them was a backhand flick on the full stretch after running the entire length of the court. And then one of them, he got back a series of smashes. And eventually Ramos Vinolas dumped one into the net. I mean, it's career highlight reel stuff already. And he's 19.
I have memories of that match, and but that was quite early on in the tournament. I think, was it first or second round? Yeah, and there's so many other matches going on at the same time, and I was flicking between channels, I think, and I did touch on that. But I also remember, I think around the same time, Tsitsipas, maybe even the same day, was involved in a 5-setter. I'm not sure if that was the same day or not, but sometimes early on at tournaments, my mind can be a bit frazzled. Much the way Medvedev's is when he's in the middle of a court in a 5-set thriller against Nadal. Do you like that? Do you like that, Owen? Do you like that? Anyway, oh, by the way, Owen, do you also like I've got a sort of trying to do a sort of a setup here of
I saw that. Great aesthetic. Love it.
Not bad, not bad. I can do better, but not bad for a beginner. I've got tennis balls, I've got tennis rackets, I've got various tickets from various years, including 2016 US Open, and got some French Open and US Open cups. This US Open Cup has seen better days. It's on its way out, but I love this. This is also from 2016 and much better than the other tournaments. The French Open goes big on the sponsor and a bit of color, but doesn't really say much about tennis. But this one has got every single winner, I think, of the US Open on the men's and the women's side since '68, which is great.
That's wonderful.
I know. I just wish it had survived a bit better because it's just cracked everywhere. I mean, it's plastic, but it's sort of cracked. However, the US Open obviously went budget for 2019 and just went like this. This is the US Open one in 2019. It's very lame. So I'm hoping to be there next month, and I'm hoping that they up the ante with the cups once again. Talking of up in the ante, Djokovic certainly did so as the clay court season progressed, winning in Rome.
Yep.
I thought going into Rome, Nadal had been, we'd already mentioned obviously the injury he got in Rome, but we'll come to that in a second. But he obviously was out injured for 4 or 5 weeks after the Indian Wells tournament and in his rib injury. He then comes back in Madrid, which is traditionally his weakest of the clay court tournaments anyway. He obviously misses Monte Carlo and Barcelona, where he's had phenomenal success, and goes out to Alcaraz there. Not necessarily a point of concern. At least he's back playing. At least he's back fit. And he did win a couple of matches there before losing to Alcaraz, and there's no shame in that. But I went into Rome thinking, if you said to me who's going to win Roland Garros at the beginning of the tournament in Rome, and I was like, I don't know. Give me a week, and I'll tell you who I think is going to win the French Open. I really wanted to see. Well, interestingly, of course, Alcaraz pulled out of Rome, which is a very mature decision to sort of rest up. He'd already played plenty of tournaments and gone deep in most of them. Did he win? He won Barcelona, I think. Monte Carlo was won by Tsitsipas, if I remember rightly, and probably the most underwhelming Masters 1000 win of the year because it didn't really tell us much about Tsitsipas. And talking of players who've kind of fallen off a cliff, you could argue his cliff was about 12 months ago in that French Open final. Absolutely. But anyway, going into Rome, and it seems like we're on a similar page here, Owen, I just thought, okay, let's see how Rome goes. If Nadal doesn't have to win Rome to make me think he's the favorite. But if he gets to the semis, and I think he was on course to play Djokovic in the semis, and of course, if he'd have got to the final, having beaten Djokovic en route, I'd have had him nailed on as my favorite going in. But it couldn't be really any worse for Nadal. Nadal was so gutted as well because he said he started to really feel like he was coming close to his top form towards the end of the first set against Shapovalov. But then what happens?
Yeah, the foot flares up at the start of the third set. And yeah, I watched that match. He was great in the first set. I think he only made 3 unforced errors. But yeah, that happened. And it wasn't necessarily a new thing, but it hadn't really happened on clay that much in the past. And I think it happening in Rome. Rome is usually where he orients himself for the clay season, even if he's had an uncommonly bad season up to that point. That's where he kind of establishes the pecking order ahead of Roland Garros. Like if he doesn't win it, he loses to Djokovic in the final, or in the semis in this case. And that didn't happen. And he had no runway left ahead of Roland Garros. Right. And so I think after that tournament, people were saying Djokovic was the favorite. And it was funny because I didn't really like either of their chances, I think. Okay. I said I thought Alcaraz was going to win the tournament because I thought Nadal, his physical issues were going to screw him. And I thought, Djokovic was in form, but I didn't really see him defending a Roland Garros title. I mean, he had won it the year before, and I was thinking, like, he could lose to Alcaraz or Nadal if Nadal is fit, or he could even lose to someone else like Tsitsipas. I just thought it was going to be extremely tough for him, draw-wise. So, yeah, it was a very weird feeling going into Roland Garros. Although I should say Djokovic looked out amazing in the Rome final. He just completely dismantled Tsitsipas, especially in the first set. Even beat him out in forehand-to-forehand exchanges, which is usually Tsitsipas's. That's the territory he wants to engage you in. Sure. So that was impressive.
I mean, interesting. Although they're almost a year apart, and the two Nadal Medvedev matches were much closer together. There's kind of a similarity for me of when Medvedev plays Nadal in Mexico. I'm thinking, yeah, I think Nadal's going to win this now. Now we've got that one over, and he just crushes him. And in a way,
Mhm.
albeit there's a much bigger gap between the two. When I saw that Djokovic was playing Tsitsipas in that final, I just thought there's just no way that Tsitsipas is winning this. Unlike the year before, when I thought he had a chance in that French Open final. Of course, he goes 2 sets to love up. And I thought he had, at that point, you obviously think he's got more than a half a chance. But a bit in a way, it's kind of like Medvedev had his moment in his chance to beat Nadal in Australia, didn't take it. Tsitsipas had his chance a year ago in Paris, didn't take it. And when it comes around again, they're not going to let you have such a good chance, if you like, in the way I saw it. And yeah,
Yeah,
and
it's a
for me, that made me pick Djokovic to win Roland Garros.
it's fair, and that's a fantastic parallel between those rivalries. I think Medvedev and Tsitsipas in tennis terms, like forehands and backhands, I think if they're not 50-50 with the other on that specific surface, Djokovic on clay, Nadal on hard, I think they're very close. I think the issue now is mental after that, after losing those close matches. And then you see that player on the other side of the net, and you have to put that devastating loss out of your mind, or else you have no chance. And
Yeah.
I think that is kind of backed up by those recent matches that you mentioned, where Djokovic just crushed Tsitsipas, Nadal just crushed Medvedev.
And going into Roland Garros and the first 4 rounds at Roland Garros, Djokovic crushed everyone. I mean, I saw
Yeah,
the match against Schwartzman. Of course, you
I,
were
I
in
was
Paris.
there too. Yeah,
Were you at that match against
I
Schwartzman?
was. It was like it was grisly. I remember even when Schwartzman went up 3-0 in the second set, it was like he's not winning this set. It Yeah, it was just amazing to watch because in that matchup, Schwartzman both has to play out of his skin, and Djokovic has to be terrible just for them
Yeah,
to be like
yeah.
on serve. It's like if Djokovic does his thing even slightly, Schwartzman has no chance. It's amazing.
This podcast could quite easily be called "Falling Off a Cliff" because Schwartzman has fallen off a cliff since that Rome final and then French Open semi final in quick succession at the end of November 2020, October 2020. And he's another one of these players that just fallen off a cliff. Tsitsipas is in a 12-month, downward spiral. Shapovalov in a 6-month downward spiral. But yeah, Schwartzman, one of these I don't know if I'll ever really, unfortunately, get back to there because, of course, he was a French Open outsider in that year of 2020. I think it's fair to say. He
Yeah.
may have needed a bit of luck with one of Djokovic or Nadal falling early, but yeah, he's a long way off it now.
Yeah, I mean, he's had his moments. I think he took a set off Nadal at Roland Garros last year.
Yeah, he did.
And
Yeah.
fourth round this year isn't too bad, but yeah, I don't know if I see him making another semi.
No. So he steamrollers through Djokovic. Alcaraz, we did touch on him. Of course, he goes out in the quarters to Zverev. Were you at that match as well or not?
No, I was watching it
Yep.
on the big screen. That was painful. That was rough to watch. Yeah.
I mean, I enjoyed watching it. You didn't enjoy watching that match?
No,
Okay.
I mean Zverev, I don't like seeing him deep in tournaments because of the abuse allegations. It's
Yeah.
so I just don't like the atmosphere when he's on court, and I had really wanted to see Alcaraz play Djokovic or Nadal, and so in the last points of that fourth set tiebreak, I thought he would win if it went to a fifth, but he wasn't getting to a fifth. And it was good tennis, but I just couldn't enjoy it.
I understand that for sure. But Alcaraz goes out. A little bit of a shock, would you say?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I gave Zverev no chance in that match.
Because he'd just beaten him a couple of weeks before in Madrid, or 4 weeks before maybe in Madrid in the final
Yeah.
handsomely, at a tournament where Zverev, obviously won it at least twice, I think.
Mhm.
And actually, I thought Zverev would give him a game in that final, give him a match in that final, but it didn't turn out that way. So, like you, I thought Alcaraz was the favourite. But we haven't mentioned somebody who's got a pretty good record at Roland Garros, a Spaniard
Right.
from Mallorca, and we've not mentioned him until now because Djokovic, as we said, steamrolled. Alcaraz, of course, has his moments, but then goes out. But if Djokovic steamrolled everyone on the way at the quarterfinals, it was very different for Rafa.
Yeah, at least in that fourth round against Felix Auger-Aliassime. I watched the first set of that match on the big screen, and he was down 5-1 in the first set.
Yeah,
Um, Like, that doesn't happen. And he won the next 2 sets after that, and after that, it seemed, okay, he's gonna win in 4 because he's got that
Yeah.
forehand going.
Yeah.
And then his game kinda collapsed again in the 4th set, and, you know, to OJ Aliassime's credit, he was playing really well. He was serving his serve +1, like, players rarely get that much mileage out of it against Nadal at Roland Garros. He was executing incredibly well. He was covering the court really well. But then for the 5th set, I was in the stands because someone left and gave us his tickets. That was really nice. And Nadal, the things Nadal did in that 5th set were just insane. I think he hit like 15 winners and 4 unforced errors. It was,
Yeah.
I mean, it was a shade below perfect tennis. Nothing
Yeah.
Felix could do.
I mean, the game that he ends up breaking to basically seal the match at around about 4-all in the 5th. I always get confused when it's going with serve. I know it could have been 4-3 or
It was
4.
4-3. Yeah.
Was it? Okay, there you go, Owen. So the game he does break, and I've seen Gil Gross do an excellent analysis of that game alone, and just says he basically, Felix does almost everything realistically perfect, but Nadal is perfect in that game when he breaks. And yeah, just watch that game alone; it's breathtaking.
Yeah.
However, it didn't fill me with immense amounts of confidence going into the quarterfinal, and I think I should definitely hand over to you on this one, at least for the first run at, because you were there at the match. You
Yeah.
said you think this was your favorite match of the year. Is that the right word, or what was the word you would use
It,
for that
it, it
match?
has to be. Djokovic Nadal has been my favorite rivalry in tennis for a long time. I think,
Hmm.
no one else on tour right now can push each other to the standard that they do. I think no one else has tennis that balanced. And so the things they force each other to do is just outrageous. Like in the first game of this match, they're having cat and mouse points at net, they're lobbing each other, they're hitting drop shots, and this is stuff you don't see in entire sets between other top players. Like the
Yeah.
the skill on display from both of them is just mind blowing. And yeah, the like you said, I didn't feel great about Nadal's chances. Like the last thing you want when you're physically compromised and about to play Djokovic is a 5-setter in the previous round. But the way Nadal came out of the gates, I mean, he was crushing his forehand at the first opportunity. He was defending really well. Like Djokovic couldn't really hit through him. Djokovic was hitting harder on average, but he was still hitting fewer winners. Nadal was just doing a great job of neutralizing his ground strokes. And so Nadal wins the first set 6-2, basically playing as well as he can. Djokovic, I think, was a little off, but you at no point did you think like, wow, Djokovic is throwing this set away. Like
Hmm.
there was not a lot he could do.
Hmm.
And where things got really interesting was the start of the second set. Because in 2021, these guys had played at Roland Garros. Nadal won the first set, and Djokovic came back and won. And that was incredible. And
Hmm.
a key part of why he did that was because he went up a break immediately at the start of the second. And Nadal got that
Yeah.
break back. But from there on, Djokovic played the match on his terms.
Yeah.
And in this match, Djokovic serves Sibby in the second set, and Nadal breaks him after like 7 deuces. It's a really high quality game. Nadal is hitting winners to set up break point. Djokovic is hitting winners to save break point. But finally, Nadal gets him with a really angled forehand and a put away volley. Um, and then Nadal holds it love, and then he breaks Djokovic again. And so at this point, it's 6-2, 3-0, double break. Historically speaking, this match is over, right? Like
Okay.
Nadal has never lost a set against Djokovic from a double break up before. Um,
Okay.
he's that means he's going to go up 2 sets, and he's not going to blow a 2-set lead to Djokovic anywhere, much less at Roland Garros, right? And so when he goes up a double break, I'm thinking like it's over. Maybe Djokovic gets a set, but like this match is done. And we were, I don't know, an hour in, and it was crazy. And then that Djokovic resurgence in the second set is one of the most breathtaking things I've ever seen. The way he returns Nadal's serve in this set is, I mean, defies words, really. I mean, like, did you see it as well? Like,
Yeah, I mean,
what
I
what did
watched it
you
on
think of that?
TV. It was so Owen and I met. I'm talking to the audience now, as you can
Yeah,
imagine. Owen and I met. I think the next day, the day after this match, I was there.
yeah,
Unfortunately, I had tickets for the quarterfinals on the second day of the two men's quarterfinals, if you like. So I watched this match at home, kind of regretting the fact that I hadn't chosen to go to Paris a day earlier. But that's how it was. Much like you in the stadium, I mean, I'm sure you'll have a different perspective at some points to me, but first of all, the return of serve, that's a really good point. From the middle of the second set or from 3-love down in the second set onwards, so many times I just saw Nadal scooping it up from his feet. You know,
yeah,
the ball would just, Nadal would serve first or second, but I
yeah.
think
It didn't
particularly for us the
matter.
second. But yeah, but next thing you know, it's back at Nadal's feet, and Nadal's doing that thing, and you're just thinking, well, at this point, you're hoping that Nadal can more or less reset the rally. We're talking about resetting the rally after a return, you know? So, and it happened so many times, or it felt like so many times. And again, sport, but tennis in particular, momentum. Once he got it back on serve, and then obviously goes on to win that set. I mean, did it finish 6-3 that set? I guess
Six
did he win
four in 88
6-4?
minutes.
In 88 minutes, yeah, right. Reminding so many bits and pieces. We look at 2020, 2021, and 2022, and we can look at so many overlaps. And I thought, I mean, you touched on it on Twitter the other day, that 2020 final, the 6-love, the tightest 6-love of all time, with so
Yeah,
many juices in that, and really so many break points on both sides, and that could easily have been, it could easily have been 4-2 either way, or whatever from those 6 games that we saw in 2020. There were some parallels in particular, though, with 2021 in terms of the momentum shift. I felt
yeah,
in 2021, the momentum shifted even before the break of serve you highlighted at the beginning of the second set that Nadal got back on. I think it was at 5-love in the
yeah.
first set in 2021, and he almost got that back on serve. I think Nadal
Hmm.
was really struggling to serve that out each time he tried, and eventually just got over the line to win that first set. And then once he broke, the momentum had shifted. And I felt, and I want to know how you felt, once he gets it back on serve, and in particularly once he wins that second set 6-4, considering how you would have felt 40 odd minutes before in terms of Nadal being up the double break, you're thinking, I think statistics. See, I didn't know the statistics behind this, but I'm sure, as you highlight, basically Nadal's a double breakup and a setup as well at Roland Garros in particular. I'm sure there's very little way back for anyone, even Djokovic. But I felt anxious because it was still really. I still thought that even in that 3-love, I think Nadal maybe just hung on to his serve as well in that 3-love, and then when he lost it, and then he was just seemed to be struggling, if you like. It was almost as though he. I don't want to say this, but sometimes it feels like Nadal sort of just seizes a moment or just nicks a break. I
Hmm.
remember when he was 5-4 up against Team in Australia, or a match he went on to lose, and he's serving for the set. And I thought, Team's been the much better player in this first set, and here we are,
Yeah.
Nadal's serving for it. Similar as well at ATP finals as well, at least once against Medvedev in 2020, I think it was.
Oh
And
yeah.
suddenly Nadal's serving for the match, and I'm thinking Nadal's not really played well against the best hardcourt player, or second best
Right.
hardcourt player in the world at the time. And actually, he does go on to lose that match too, but because his form doesn't change. And I thought, I'm not saying Nadal wasn't playing excellent. That's not what I'm saying in that set and a half. But I felt as though the gap was just like this. And I actually thought that by the midpoint of that second set, Djokovic had seized the moment. What did you think?
Yeah, I definitely felt like that by the end of the second set because at that point it's one set all, and so I didn't rule out Nadal's chances, but it seems like at that point Djokovic had succeeded in making the match a war of attrition, which I thought was what he wanted going in. Um, but more than that, I mean, for the majority of that set, Nadal couldn't do anything except react to Djokovic's return because Djokovic was just, like you said, slamming it at his feet every time. One of my favorite stats from this match is by the end of the second set, Nadal's winning percentage on his first serve all the way down to 58% after not being broken for a set and a half. Like that's a terrible stat, but that's how well Djokovic was returning. It was just, I mean, he broke Nadal 3 times in 4 service games. Like
Yeah.
it was mind blowing. But what I failed to consider was that Djokovic was redlining. Like I kind of assumed he was just going to maintain that level in the third set.
Even energy wise, I think there's
Yeah.
some moments I saw him do this, I think, in the fourth set at one point.
Yep.
I'm actually going to touch on something that happened in Australia, but it's actually related to this in the final in Australia. There was something about Nadal's celebrations towards the end of that third set that he gets it back that makes me think, hang on a second, if he thinks that actually, you're not going to be going. We saw how Nadal was against Taylor Fritz. He wasn't celebrating too much in that match because he probably thought there's a good chance I'm not going to go much further in the
Right.
tournament because of the injury. Conversely, in Australia, it was like that. That does give me a thing where he's going like this. You don't see most players celebrating a break of serve when they're 2 sets down, if you like, and on the verge, if you like. And again, coming to that French Open semi-final, and again, I want to know how you felt about the stadium. Funnily enough, going into the match, I thought Djokovic would win. Of course, a
Yep.
set and a double breakup, you're thinking, my goodness, what's going on here? And Nadal's obviously the heavy favorite. But then I changed my mind again when Djokovic steamrollers to that second set in the end, or steamrollers sort of five games out of 6, or whatever the run was, or 6 games out of 7. And then the funny thing was, though, during the third set, during the fourth set in particular, despite the fact that Djokovic was a breakup, I'm now looking at Nadal a lot, and Nadal's body language, which seemed quite troubled in that second set with the return of serve. I think Nadal's got this. I think he knows
Yeah.
that Djokovic, in that, despite the fact that he's staring down the barrel, including set points in that fourth set and staring down the barrel, you know what I mean, to go towards a fifth set. I think he thinks, do you know what? Even if Djokovic wins this set, and I'm quite prepared for him to do so, he's obviously a breakup and serving for, as it turns out. I'm going to beat him in the fifth set. And I felt he was pretty sure of that. I mean, I'm not sure the exact things with his body language that I was looking out for, but I was watching maybe some Carlos Moya moments, just didn't seem to be bothered at all. And I thought, but he might break back as well. And if he breaks back, I'm sure he's winning the tiebreak as it then goes into. Did
Yeah.
you feel that in the stadium as well, that even during that fourth set, it was on Nadal's racket?
Yeah, I think we can skim over the third because Djokovic was not good in that set, and Nadal was good, but not as good as the first set. And yeah, in the fourth, even when Djokovic had that break, it did feel like Nadal had some momentum. I think something I haven't heard mentioned about the match is after Djokovic gets that break in the fourth, he is not a factor in a return game for the rest of the match. I don't even know if he gets to 30 for the rest of the match in a return game. So he loses his rhythm on the return of serve, so Nadal's holding easily. And Nadal is sort of slowly getting into these return games. Like, I think with Djokovic serving at 4-2, Nadal has low 15, and then it's 40-30, and Nadal has a forehand down the line to make it deuce, and he barely misses. And so Djokovic holds, and it's 5-2, but you're thinking, like, he was lucky to get away with that. Like, he maybe should have been broken there. Nadal had a couple bad forehand misses in that game. And then the 5-3 game, which is the kind of inflection point of that set. I mean, like you said, Djokovic gets to set point twice, and he serves really well in a lot of this game. He gets an ace, he gets a service winner, he gets a great serve that sets up a serve +1. But then at either the first or the second deuce, he kind of starts to miss first serves. And immediately Nadal is demolishing him. Like, he's getting it back deep, and that's setting up forehand winners. And so when that happens from the stands, it was like I could sort of feel Djokovic starting to crack. And so, he saves one break point with a great drop shot and a pass. And then on the second one, when he missed that first serve, I was like, okay, he's getting broken here. And then he did. Like, Nadal hits a good return and then inside out forehand winner. And then after that, Djokovic holds to get to the tiebreak. But yeah, he never really felt threatening after that. I think his best patch of play was when he was down 5 match points and he saved 3 of them.
Yeah. I mean, going into the tiebreak again, for probably the only time in 2022, a prediction of mine, I thought, Nadal's going to win this. And he races into a 6-1 lead, was it? Something like that, 6-1 lead, 6-2 lead. And, but we thought, hang on a second, he gets it back to 6-4 with, again, an unbelievable return in that spell, in that
We need to talk
tiebreak.
about this. He hits a first serve return winner down match point against Nadal at Roland Garros. Like, what the hell is that? That's outrageous.
I mean, well, it's kind of like the Federer one, I guess, in the semifinals in the US.
It's exactly like that.
About 10 years ago, yeah.
Like, and you can point to the serve and say it was a bad serve. Like, no one else is hitting a return winner in that position. I can tell you that.
I mean, regarding that Federer one, and maybe had the same attitude. he just thought, I'm going to go for it. Federer, of course, in the press conference afterwards, said he was a bit lucky
Yeah, that
with
so
that
I have
return.
many thoughts about that, but if you watch these return winners, like it's not really it's go for broke in the sense that it's a winner, but like it's the greatest returner of all time hitting a return winner off of a mediocre serve. Like that's not, that's not a unicorn. Like that makes sense. Like if you hit a bad serve against a great returner, it's going to get punished. Yeah, the lucky thing makes no sense.
No, I mean, but
Juan
yeah, I
Jose,
don't mind that.
Juan Jose Vallejo, who's a great tennis writer, has a
Hmm.
really good explainer article on this that I can link
Okay.
to at some point. Yeah.
Cool. That sounds good, and I'll tweet that out there too. Yeah, I know. I'm familiar with him. I remember. So I go back with him in terms of following him on Twitter and seeing an interesting thread he did on Djokovic against Nadal at Madrid. I think it was in
Yeah,
2009, and
I
then
remember
hit
that one.
semi-final. And he's a great thread on that. From that moment onwards, I was hooked to his tweets, if you like, especially the tennis related ones. And the consequences of that, and blah 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 blah. And check that out if you can, but definitely follow him on Twitter. Anyway, Nadal wins that match with what became his trademark in the tournament.
The backhand down the line,
The
you mean?
backhand down the
Yeah.
line, not a trademark in his career, but a
No.
trademark in that tournament. At least in the final and the quarterfinal. But I think there was another match when he hit a backhand winner to win a match. Maybe it was in Australia. I'm not sure. But maybe I'm getting carried away. But it was just such a bizarre way to finish two matches. Maybe he hit
Yeah,
one against Zverev at some point as well in an important moment. I can't remember.
maybe. But yeah, we were talking about this on Twitter. Like, no one talks about the match point in this match. I mean, like, it was a
Yeah,
15 plus shot rally. Both guys are hitting with good depth.
gets a
Nadal
net
hits a
cord as
shot
a
that,
net.
yeah, like, and it doesn't skim off the net cord. It like hits the net cord and kind of pops up and floats to the baseline. Djokovic hits one that more skims it. And then Nadal wins it by going for broke with a backhands down the line. And that historically is the ground stroke he likes to go for the least. And so it was a phenomenal way to finish the match because it was like there was no other way through. So that's what he did.
Bounced up quite high as well, but he dealt with aplomb and turns to his team. And maybe I went into that match with a bit too much negativity regarding his chances. I think probably deep down Nadal probably did fancy his chances. I mean, he was a 13-time French Open time winner at the time, but the press conferences before was very different. Nadal was, we know how Nadal is, but actually
Yeah.
Djokovic, more interestingly, he tends to be a bit more expressive, but he used the words, which is quite strong, even by Djokovic. I like my chances, he said,
Yeah.
which is as strong as you're going to get from a top sports person. If you like, that most people keep the cards close to the chest, keep the pressure off them. That makes sense, and Nadal especially. And I like Nadal, Federer's. I like Djokovic's chances too. What did you make of Ivan Isevic's post-match comments regarding Djokovic?
Yeah. So Sasha Osmo of Tennis Majors did a great interview with Ivanisevic. I mean, it was really revealing. He said Djokovic was hurt by it. Like days after the match, they were still yet to discuss it tactically.
Yeah,
He said Djokovic was flat emotionally. He didn't have the necessary penetration on his cross-court backhand. Um, yeah, I mean, I thought a lot of it was fair. Like you can look at this match. The way I think that Djokovic lost this match was that he was way too streaky. Like we talked about how insanely good he was in the second set, broke Nadal 3 times. But in the other 3 sets combined, he only broke once. That's not
yeah,
good enough.
yeah. That's a good point.
You cannot let Nadal hold his serve every time for 2 entire sets. Not going to get it done. And so I think from his end, it was a disappointing performance because Nadal was great. I think no matter how well you play, you're going to lose that first set. I think the third and the fourth, Djokovic could have done better. And you don't get a match like that back. So yeah, I thought it was understandable that he was hit by it.
Semi-final, Nadal against Zverev. Both of us were in the stadium for this one,
Yeah.
and you have some thoughts on tennis as a whole and this match. I mean, just before you get to that, Owen, I just want to say that tiebreak was nuts. I mean, the
Oh, it
match
was
was
wild.
nuts, but at least the tiebreak itself at the end of the first set was nuts in a good way in terms of Nadal 6-2 down and somehow manages to win it. I think it was 9-7 or 10-8. But
10-8.
but with some unbelievable winners from the back of the court, from unbelievable. We've seen the still shots of him probably struggling to just get his racket onto a serve, and you're thinking somehow he wins the point from here. And yeah, just Nadal doing what Nadal does. However, Owen, you told me at the time, and I'm sure you still remember this since, some of your thoughts about that match and the conditions.
Yeah, just another very stressful experience, like Alcaraz Zverev, but maybe even worse, because you know the winner of this match is probably winning the tournament against Ruud or Cilic. And again, like, didn't want it to be Zverev because he's been credibly accused of abuse. Like, he's been a really, really problematic figure. Like the whacking of the umpire's chair and almost taking their foot off. Like,
Which was
it's
this
horrible.
year, actually. I'd forgotten
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
he's just like a malignant presence on court. And so, and in the first set, it was like, it seemed like he was going to win that set because I think Nadal doesn't hit a forehand winner in this match until the tiebreak. Like, I've heard people say like that first set was one of the best sets of the year. I'm like, it was not. But then, like you said, Nadal came to life in the tiebreak. Outrageous passing shot at 4-6 on the dead run, and then another one to seal the set. He's basically standing at the back wall and passed Zverev down the line. But where this match got really agonizing was the second set, because the roof is on, it's humid.
Stop
and
raining.
So, yes. And so the sun isn't there to dry the clay, and the humidity is making things wet. And so the clay is essentially mud, and it's dragging at the ball with every bounce. And so neither guy can hit a winner. And so they're playing these long rallies, but not in the good way, like rallies that are longer than they should be because they're impossible to end, and both guys are defending better than they can attack. They had a 44 shot rally. Nadal didn't hold his serve in the second set until 4-5. It was, and so when, Zverev fell over and broke his ankle or whatever the injury was, it didn't surprise me because they had been playing for 3 hours. Like, monstrously long rallies. And a tennis player is not really built to go through that. Like, this was, the conditions felt kind of inhumane. And so I think, the injury was horrible. It was rough to watch. You don't wish that on anyone, even problematic figures. But I think in a way it saved people from a 6.5 hour match, because like 3 hours and they weren't even done with 2 sets. Yeah, that was the worst part of the tournament for me.
I mean, maybe, as you say, the conditions contributed to that, and I don't think that's been touched upon enough since. What it does lend itself to that argument, at least, is the fact that I don't remember many times when an injury like that happens on a tennis court, at least with the top players. What do I mean? I mean, we see, like, oh, hang on a second, I think Nadal's got a problem with his abdominal thing here, or Djokovic has got a problem here, or has he got a back problem, or he's not serving at quite the same speed as he was in the previous set. He's not moving around. It's always like this, and then or suddenly you think everything's fine, and then there's the trainer's coming on. Oh, I didn't. It's always like this. That what happened with Zverev just rarely happens in tennis, when it's like it's a ligament damage or a break and or a snap, as I think it probably was, and it happens instantly. You hear him scream inside the stadium. I know, everybody knows. That's it. It's almost like a football type injury in a way, in that you just one of the it happens. It's horrible, and this guy's not going to be on a court for 6 months or so, and it's unusual in tennis when you can just sort of pinpoint an injury like that, and quite possibly the conditions contributed to it. I think you're right. It was just so stodgy. That's the word I use for that match.
I think in the future, if you're going to have conditions like that, get a couple decent pro players to hit for 5 minutes and say, like, hey, like, can you play tennis in these conditions? Is it possible to hit a winner? And if they say no, then you delay the match.
Open the roof as well. I think reopening the roof is a no-brainer. I don't know why tournaments these days, they think that once the roof is closed, they've got to keep it closed. Like, I remember Wimbledon 2018, despite the fact there was blazing sunshine the following day, the fact that they'd finished the night before with the roof closed in that semi-final between Nadal and Djokovic, they decided to reconvene with the roof closed again, which is just silly, I think, for a variety of reasons. And in fact, I mentioned the one I actually got to ask Nadal a question. Yeah, at
That's right.
Wimbledon.
Yeah.
Yeah, in I got it in Spanish as well because all his English questions were used up, and it was a bit easier actually to get it in Spanish. And I asked him about the roof basically, and he said, "Yeah, well, I haven't got a big sample size this year to go from because I think he'd only played a few minutes under the roof until that point. In fact, throughout the whole tournament, as it turned out." But he says 2018, I remember how the conditions were. And he's like, yeah. And he also saw Djokovic play in the third round against Van Rijthoven. And he said that probably one of the biggest differences as well is slipping over and slipping and blah, 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 blah,
Yeah.
blah. So again, we are, putting an unnecessary risk. Like, listen, roofs are great. We can use them in an emergency, especially with tournaments like Wimbledon when it's raining every other day. And it's great that we can continue with the tennis. That day, they could have said, look, is it going to be raining in 20 minutes? No. Okay, let's just postpone the match by 20 minutes. And as you say, get a couple of professionals as well to see how stodgy it is and how slow the conditions are. But also, even if you do start the match under the rain, with the rain under the roof, immediately open it as soon as it stops raining and you're confident that the rain will hold off for a lengthy period of time. So Nadal then prevails at the expense of Zverev. On the other side of the draw, all sorts of weird things have gone on. Of course, Tsitsipas goes out fairly early. Marin Cilic musters some form from yesteryear, but not just some form from yesteryear on a surface that we never thought we'd ever see him get to a semi-final on, or a slam at least. And he's up against Casper Ruud, who's had a solid tournament. Unlike his form going in, I thought his clay court form, I think he might have won a 250 earlier in the season, but there was nothing about Casper Ruud's form that said much to me. But what was key, of course, about the whole tournament really was the draw. And that was another thing I mentioned before. I said, once Rome had gone the way it had, with Tsitsipas then usurping Nadal from number 3 in the world, I think it was, and with Medvedev coming back from injury, you now got Alcaraz was seeded 5, was he maybe, or 6? And Nadal was seeded 5. Maybe Nadal was seeded 5, actually.
Yeah, Nadal was 5. Yeah.
So you've got, and then suddenly all 3 are in the same quarter with Djokovic, and or half. Sorry. Anyway, you're going to get Nadal against Djokovic in the semi, followed by Alcaraz and Zverev potentially in the semi or whatever, quarter semi. And so you had this real lopsided nature. And once Tsitsipas goes out early, before you know it, Casper Ruud is against Cilic in the semi-final, a match, of course, that we were at, and it really never looked like any doubt that Ruud will win that match, I think.
Well, see, I actually thought Cilic after the first set was going to win.
Okay.
But then pretty quickly in the second, Ruud. That's the best I've ever seen Ruud play, and he did it for 3 sets in a row. He was outstanding. Yeah, I mean, I remember we watched that match together from the stadium. I remember Cilic hit a drop shot at one point, and you yelled out like, "You can't teach that, marathon." that was a fun moment.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, well deserved for Ruud, but there was only one player on court in that final, so.
Yeah, and Ruud talked about how nervous he was going into that match, and Nadal does what Nadal does, and yeah, it's a pity that we can't really dwell on that final just because it's not huge amounts to say. I mean, of course, you could do in the immediate aftermath, but we've got other things to talk about, which is the grass court season, which comes up next, and obviously we have various 250s and 500s. Berrettini's looking good. In fact, I think he didn't lose a single match throughout the grass court season, but before you know it, he gets COVID and has to pull out of Wimbledon.
That's such a shame.
Yeah, such unfortunate situation, particularly given his form. And I may well have put him as my second favorite going into the tournament. But anyway, that happens. Djokovic decides, like he often does these days, to not play a match or not play a competitive match, so to speak. I think it was an exhibition in London just in the week before where he had a couple of matches. And I actually watched those exhibition matches. And I know you can't take too much, but I thought, he just swatted Felix aside.
Yeah, I did see
and
that.
looked very good. And Nadal actually lost, I think, his match to Felix. It's one of these sort of, super tiebreak or tiebreakers to decide, I think, because it's 1 set all and then he went to a tiebreak or something like that. But Nadal was looking good and getting better. And of course, Nadal hadn't played on grass for 3 years. But going into Wimbledon, I thought I made Djokovic a favorite. It's hardly rocket science, given his unbelievable record at Wimbledon. But I actually made him favorite despite what had gone on the previous 6 months. We started the podcast by talking about Australia and some of his lack of match practice. I actually made him not necessarily a stronger favorite, but it certainly didn't put me off. Why? Because I think there's two types of pressure. I'm bottling it down here. There's two types of pressure in sport. One is the pressure when you're at the front, you're leading from the front and you're being chased. And
Yeah.
that's the pressure I think he had going into the US Open last year. That's a very different pressure when you're leading from, and you saw him hang on. Okay, he's got some really good opponents as he made the final at the US Open, but and eventually it caught up with him, and you're just constantly being chased down, if you like, by various people. And Medvedev very much had his number in the final, and I think nerves played their part. The pressure, though, that he was going on into Wimbledon at, and many people were highlighting this, he's not going to play it, might not play another major for, 10, 11 months, or certainly not going to play the US or blah, blah, blah. And he's had all this history gone before him, and everyone's been talking about the vaccine and blah, blah, blah. That is pressure, but it's a backs against the wall pressure. And I like Djokovic back against the wall situation.
Yeah.
I liken it to a little bit like you've got a penalty in football, and it's a penalty shootout, and you've got to score to keep your team in the tournament or in the game or in the match. That's a lot of pressure. If it's to win the match, here's the penalty, put the ball down. If you score, your team has won. It's like, oh, okay. All right, I think I can do this. I'm not saying it's that easy, but statistically, the penalties to win the match are what are scored more often than the ones to keep your team in it. And I felt as though Djokovic was back against the wall. His back against the wall was very much there in the first round when he drops a set, as he did last year.
Right.
But rounds 2, 3, I'm just trying to remember. I mean, he was unbelievable against was it Kecmanovic?
Kecmanovic. Yeah, that was really, really good. Kecmanovic couldn't do anything.
Van Rijthoven was a good match, and to be honest with you, there was no shame in losing that set because Van Rijthoven was just serving unbelievably, I think, in that set. But basically for the last 2 sets, again, Djokovic was just out of this world.
Yeah,
he's asleep for a couple of sets, it seems like, against Sinner, but once he breaks at the beginning of the third, no looking back.
Well, can we talk about this for a second? Like,
sure.
How is he able to lose 2 sets against Sinner, who has just beaten Carlos Alcaraz, top 10 player, and he wins the last 3 sets like he's playing a wild card? Like, this is amazing. Against Tsitsipas last year at Roland Garros, like, he does this without even facing a break point. Like, it's insane. I mean, and this is a relatively new thing as well. Like, his winning from 1 or 2 sets down. Like, before 2021, I didn't associate it with him that much. But yeah, now it's like he's having these comebacks for fun almost.
Yeah, it's almost like he loses the first set and it's time to wake up. And we saw that in the semi-final and the final. I mean, I remember him losing the first set to Carreño. Was he on the verge of losing, or you think he just lost it to Carreño Busta in that famous match in New York when he hits the ball behind him?
He was down 6-5.
He was down 6-5, so he was on the verge of losing it potentially. I think Carreño Busta was about to serve for it, and I just thought, oh, that's a big. And I think he also lost the first set to Carreño Busta again at the French Open. I think they met around about the quarterfinal stage that year. And on both of those occasions, albeit, that first set didn't quite come to a conclusion as it turned out in New York. But on both of those occasions, I thought, oh, hang on a second, Djokovic is in a spot of bother here, or even in a bit of trouble, somewhere between those two. Spot of bother and a bit of trouble. Bit of trouble is more serious, isn't it? In big trouble is what you would think he would be against Sinner. But from the moment he broke at the beginning of the third, it never felt like he was in trouble. As you say, very few break points. It was almost inexorable. It felt like a straight sets win.
It did, yeah. And like, even by the end of the third set, like, the events of the first 2 felt like they were a million years ago. I mean, and that backhand he hit in the 5th set. I think the last step he takes, he jumps over like half the baseline, slides for a good few feet, maybe a meter, and then just nails this cross-court pass. And then Sinner misses a smash on the next point on breakpoint, because of course you do after that. Like, you would lose your mind after being on the receiving end of a shot like that. Shot of the tournament, easily.
Yeah.
And also nice to see Djokovic still doing Djokovic things. Because I think after Roland Garros, like, I think he was mostly himself in the Nadal match, but I think he was missing a little something extra. And so in this, somewhere along the run to the final in Wimbledon, it was like, okay, he's still here, and that was nice.
So on the other side of the draw, Nadal is not having things all his own way. Maybe we should have expected this, that he would drop the odd set here and there. I do remember in that first round match, I think I spoke to you on our spaces, probably between the first and second round, because I said to you that I really wanted to speak to him. It was either the first round or the second. The first and the second round matches are a bit of a blur for me because they're so similar in the way they played out. One was against Cerundolo, and I think that's the one I'm thinking of. And one was against Berankis. Berankis was the first round, and Cerundolo was
Right.
the second, I think. And in fact, it's the second round match when I attended his press conference, and I didn't get a question in on that occasion. And I spoke to you shortly afterwards, a day or so afterwards, and I said, I really wanted to get this question in, and I said to you what the question would have been, and it would have been, how do you do that? What do I mean? Well, in that second set, he was on the verge. I think he was facing a couple of break points to go a double break down to
Yeah.
basically be at 2 sets all.
Yeah, yeah,
Not
the
only,
fourth set, right.
yeah, exactly. Not only does he get that, does he save serve then? He also ends up breaking serve and going on to win the fourth set and actually the match. But and I wanted to ask him, how do you do that? How do you? Because we're all thinking as this as mere mortals, that when the match is slipping, not just slipping, it's slipping, sliding, and galloping off down the slope away from you. How do you do that? Do you? I mean, I would have made this question a lot shorter than I'm rephrasing it to you now. But how does he think about? Oh, I remember in 2008 against arguably the best player of all time, or certainly one of the best three, at least on the men's side. Does he think back to that match and go, if I can do it then, I can do it now? Does he think back to some of these other matches that seem to be slipping away? Does he think back even just to more recently in Australia? Does he draw on that? Or is he just in the moment, point by point? Or does he even do what I do when I play ping pong and I'm in a spot of bother? I think just win the next sort of 2 points. Just win the next
Yeah.
2 points, see where you're at, and then we'll reevaluate. Let's say you're 5 points behind and it's towards the end of the match or whatever. You think win your 2 service points, 3 service points, whatever. Then we'll take it from there. Does he think point by point like that or whatever? Now, you, Owen, made a really good point when I mentioned it. Do you remember what you said to me?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. But if I don't think Nadal wants to tell you the answer,
Yeah,
and I think
exactly.
even if he did, I don't know how well he would be able to articulate it. I
No.
really don't think he thinks about this kind of thing much. I think he just doesn't.
Yeah, I think you're right. He's very well media trained. He's got his PR guy as well alongside him in the press conference. And but anyway, he does do it. He comes back, wins that. I thought he was very good, despite the sort of controversial moment against who was it? Was it Musetti in the third round?
No, Sonego. That was
Sonego.
weird.
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was. Yeah, I mean, calling him over, I think to say like you're grunting too loudly or something, or like, and this was right after Sonego had gotten a break back in the third to make it 4-all, kind of the first competitive moment in the entire match. So yeah, that was not great. Although, to Nadal's credit, he apologized after the match and was like, yeah, I
Yeah.
shouldn't have done that, which I think is more than certain other players would have done.
I actually watched that match from center court. I think I got in for was that a straight sets match, that one, or four
Yeah.
sets? Yeah, it was straight sets. So the final set I was in for that, and I thought that by now Nadal, well, not quite purring, but was certainly getting into the tournament much more than he had in the first two matches. And then he comes up, I think, in the fourth round against. Oh, and I was at that match for its entirety against the Dutchman Van der Sonsloop, and I may well have butchered his name, but that'll have to do for now. And again, he's brilliant
Yeah.
against him. I think he had a little wobble trying to serve it out or trying to hold serve in the third set, but eventually wins that, I think, on a tiebreak, if I remember. And by now, with the only thing, there was a mention about the abdominals in a press conference, maybe in the second round, that press conference, which I was telling you about just now after the $7 match. And somebody did ask him and he said, look, I'm not talking about it. I've spoken a
Yeah.
lot about injuries the last few months and maybe the last 20 years. So anyway, then he goes on, of course, and wins that match anyway. And then I also was there for the entirety of the Taylor Fritz match. And for
That would be an experience.
for the first 4 games, we're talking sort of, absolute peak Nadal, at least on grass anyway. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And he does an overhead. Now I've never watched. I don't think I've watched the match again. He does an overhead smash, I think, to maybe seal the 3-1 or 4-1, or to either to break or even consolidate the break. And I wonder if that's the moment when he did because he'd already got this like slight twinge on the abdominals, but he clearly exacerbated it in the first set against Taylor Fritz. He had that bizarre thing with his father telling him to retire. We weren't 100% sure if that's what he was saying, but he was asked in his press conference afterwards, did your father urge you to retire? And he said yes. We had this
and
bizarre...
his sister, I think.
Yeah. Pardon, say again?
And his sister,
And
I
his
think.
sister, yeah, exactly. And in fact, talking of looking at body language, the box barely moved for the next 2 or 3 hours. The rest of the match, they didn't react. They didn't really punch the air. We know how emotional that. Well, of course, all families and friends can be, even coaches, etc. But none of them were moving. That was a concern. I went to his post-match press conference after that match. There was a weird feeling. I still came away from that press conference thinking he will start the match against Kyrgios, but there was no way I had 100% confidence that he would finish it. But there were, I remember Ben from Game to Love, he was like, I don't think he's taken to the court on Friday. And then there was a moment on the Thursday when I was just watching the women's semi-final, and they cut, maybe just before the match, they cut to Nadal on a practice court. And I saw him practicing his serve, and I thought, this is not normal. This is like somebody who can barely lift their shoulder, This was... And he said in the press conference, unfortunately, I couldn't attend the one where he actually pulled out. Given that press conference, it was kind of an emergency one on the Thursday evening. But as soon as we saw that was breaking, we knew what was coming. And yeah, sad end to his Wimbledon. Did you think he had a chance to win against Kyrgios, against Djokovic?
Against Kyrgios, yeah. Less against Djokovic.
Yeah.
I was gutted. I wanted a Djokovic Nadal final. That was what I had wanted from the men's tournament from the beginning.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it would have been perfect. Meeting number 60 between those two, 42 major titles on the court at the same time. Stakes couldn't be higher. Yeah, I wanted
one
badly.
One arguably to, I mean, we've said it so many times before, but one arguably to put themselves, I mean, not beyond distance, but really firmly in the driving seat for the slam race, and then the other one putting themselves back in the race, if you like.
Yeah, and Djokovic had never really been in that position, like trying to stay in it before. Although maybe Wimbledon 2019,
yeah,
Federer, but I think he would have caught up anyway. But yeah, it was sad, and Nadal's forehand against Fritz was doing all kinds of crazy things because he couldn't rely on his serve. And that was the level it needed to be at against Djokovic. So, I do think there's a universe in which Nadal doesn't have the ab tear. He plays well. He beats Kyrgios, plays Djokovic, and we get a great match. Still think Djokovic would have won 4 sets probably, but I really wanted to see that.
I wanted to see it too. I would have made Djokovic favorite just as I had done at the beginning of the tournament. But it wouldn't have been. I wouldn't have been cut and dried about it like I had been with certain other matches. Sometimes I've been certain about other matches have been wrong, but I would have possibly even gone for 5 sets with those two and Sinner. Similar sort of 2018 style match, which would have just been unbelievable and would have been amazing. But unfortunately, we were deprived of that. We got to see Kyrgios, who I thought really couldn't play any better than he did in the final, but it just wasn't good enough.
Yeah, I mean, Djokovic is returning again. It's so good. And I mean, like, what a weapon to have on your side. Like, how good would it feel to know no matter how big a server you're playing, you're going to break them at some point. Like, you're going to get your looks. Yeah, it's amazing. It's one of the best skills shots, whatever you want to call it, of the entire era of men's tennis.
Absolutely. And he wins 4 sets. We're basically up to the 1st of August almost. We've had the last couple of weeks with a few tournaments here and there. But I'd like to finish with kind of a look ahead to the rest of the year, particularly for Djokovic, really, because...
Yeah. Well, he's not going to have much of a rest.
Well, that's what I mean. What does it look like? What did you think? What did you think about the social media he posted? I think it was yesterday, thanking the fans, but going into a bit more detail about his current situation.
It's nothing new. I know he wants his. I just hope we don't get deportation saga #2.
He said
I,
he said there might be a way, or did I? He said if there might be a way in. I don't know if what he
I
meant by
no,
that.
I think it just depends on whether the U.S. like changes their policy.
So that's it. It's as
I
simple as
mean,
that.
maybe there's a backdoor thing. I don't know. Some people were saying like, "Oh, Joe Novak, if you go through Texas, like you can get to New York that way." And I'm just like, "Oh my god, please don't! Like, please don't do this."
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he's not going to get vaccinated. I think we have to come to terms with that. So, yeah, he may not play on the American hard courts at all.
Yeah.
Which would be disastrous, really, because he's the greatest hard court player of all time.
Yeah.
It's shooting himself in the foot. He would have a chance to win the U.S. Open for sure. But obviously, you can't win if you can't play. So if he does play, I assume he'll do pretty well. And if he doesn't, he's gonna have to figure out stuff to do for the next however many months.
Yeah, I think we'll see him at the Laver Cup. We'll see him at the
That's
end of year.
right. Oh,
I know. We'll see him at the end of the year finals. He might do another tournament or two in between. He'll probably do Paris Bercy as well.
Oh yeah, good point.
Final question then, really. Who's favourite there for the men's US Open title?
I really like Nadal's chances, to be honest. I think winning the Australian Open will give him confidence. He's been good on hard courts this year. I think Medvedev, as he is currently, is not going to beat him. I think Alcaraz could beat him, but I'm like not pumping the brakes on Alcaraz, but lowering my expectations for him at majors this year, at least after Roland Garros and Wimbledon. And I don't really see Nadal losing to anyone else.
Alcaraz now being 4 in the world, I think that might help him a bit. It'll just mean that one or two players that he had the fight. He had Berrettini in the third round, I think it was, in Australia when he'd been looking unbelievable. And in fact, we saw Berrettini get to the semis there. We know Berrettini's level's pretty high, extremely high. I think I've heard Berrettini described as a good gatekeeper in terms of the fact that he's below Djokovic, and so and Alcaraz very nearly beat him, and he'll be, hopefully for his sake, he'll be seated in the top 4. Of course, with Zverev will probably be out injured, I guess. I don't see him making a comeback, so that will help Alcaraz's chances. He could be in the opposite side of the draw to Nadal, for example, and it could open up for him, especially if Medvedev went out earlier. Medvedev could do anything between third round exit and win. That's where I see Medvedev right now. It could be any one of those two extremes.
Yeah, I think he'll go deep. I just don't know if he'll win. Like you sort of said, I don't think he's been his best self this year on the court. So yeah, I don't know if I would like his chances against a fellow informed top player. So
maybe Sinner can get to a final or
I mean,
final.
Sinner's been blowing my mind recently because I recently thought, or I used to think he didn't have a high enough like peak level. And then he beats Alcaraz at Wimbledon the way he does. Breadsticks him twice, like a couple of days ago after losing a tiebreak, which was amazing. Goes up 2 sets against Djokovic at Wimbledon. I think he's building to a semi or a final very soon.
Owen, I've had 1 hour and 42 minutes of your time. I said give me an hour. Thank you very much for being my first guest. I'm sure I'll have you on again. Just let us know where I can find you, or where we can find you, both on Twitter in terms of what you're writing online, etc.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Tennis Nation. Probably need to change that soon. It's been my handle for a while. And writing for popcorntennis.com.
Cool. And definitely check that out. Owen and also his other colleagues at Popcorn Tennis produce some top stuff. And I'm not just saying that because Owen is here. Definitely check out the Nadal one from, I think it's the 15th of January, and it's your pinned tweet anyway. But check out many others, both in terms of the men's and the women's game. And look forward to speaking to you again soon, Owen. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, John. Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.